So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the press conference of the European Union Election Observation Mission to Ethiopia 2010. We invited you here because we're going to present the final report on the mission findings. The final report will be presented by Chief Observer Thijs Berman, who is on my right. We are having live streaming on the internet, both on the European Parliament's website and on the European Union Election Observation Mission's website in English and in Amharic. We have been working to attach a chat room to the mission website. Unfortunately, at the moment is not yet available because we wanted to enable Ethiopian journalists and audiences to ask questions via chat. We hope to get it work during this press conference, so hopefully at the end of the press conference people can ask questions from all over the world. Nevertheless, the stream is on at the moment on the internet. So Thijs Berman we are going to present the final report, and then we will have a question and answer session in which you can ask your questions. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon to you all. This unusual press conference takes place in Brussels. Unusual because the government of Ethiopia has finally refused access to this mission and to me for the presentation of the final report in Addis Ababa itself. It means that Ethiopian citizens might not get access to the analysis and recommendations they are entitled to receive. Their government is doing everything it can to deprive its citizens of essential information on their elections. This is unprecedented. It never happened in more than 80 observation missions in more than 50 countries. In European Parliament, my colleagues, other chief observers and I are deeply concerned. It is a truly undemocratic decision to block the free flow of information. However, this comes not entirely unexpected. Of our preliminary statement right after the elections, the state media in Ethiopia only filtered the few positive aspects to their audience. An EU election observation mission is a service to citizens in countries throughout the world to assess the electoral process. And while evaluating all aspects of elections in an independent, impartial and neutral manner, we contribute to the respect of fundamental human rights of citizens, the right to elect their leaders in free and democratic elections, according to the international standards of the UN. As the chief observer of this mission, I think we need to do everything we can to allow Ethiopian citizens to read the final report, and that is why this press conference is web-streamed. I wish to express my gratitude to the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia and to the people of Ethiopia for their cooperation and for their hospitality. To the European Commission, to the Cabinet of High Representative Catherine Ashton, to the heads of mission in Addis Ababa, and in particular to the EU delegation in Addis. And of course, my gratitude goes out to all the observers, long-term and short-term, to the core team of this mission, headed by Deputy Chief Observer Tony Rice, and to the mission staff. They did a splendid job, and I am proud to present the results. Let me now describe the elections, our main findings, and our recommendations. On election day, we have been observing in 815 polling stations in all regions and followed the counting of the votes and the final aggregation of the results. The electorate consists of 32 million voters, and the turnout was 93.4%. 63 parties competed, only 5 had sufficient candidates in all regions. The parties were poorly organized and inexperienced. The opposition was rarely present in the rural areas where 80% of the Ethiopian electorate lives. These were peaceful elections and reasonably well organized. Our main observations: even though the results were largely accepted, there were and there are very serious problems, leading to the conclusion that these elections did not meet international standards. First, There is an important lack of level playing field for the political parties, giving a clear advantage to the ruling party. The separation between the ruling party and public administration was blurred at the local level in many parts of the country. This has been directly witnessed by our observers. There has been misuse of state resources by the ruling party, use of trucks, of hi-fi, of buildings to be able to campaign, an advantage the opposition, of course, didn't have. Second, in 27% of cases observed, the polling station results were different to those previously recorded by observers at polling stations. Third, the legal framework in Ethiopia is good, and Ethiopia signed international agreements. However, as our observations show, the implementation of laws and some new laws created constraints on the electoral process and more particularly on the full enjoyment of fundamental civil and political rights. 4. The credibility of some results is weakened by the very high percentage of votes in favor of the ruling front, together with relatively small percentages of invalid votes. One example, even considering that Tigray is the traditional stronghold of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, part of the EPRDF, the ruling party, 95%, with 98% 76 in favor of TPLF, 95% turnout, with 98% 76 in favor of TPLF. In the Aksum constituency, these kind of results are not impossible, but statistically highly improbable. 5. The lack of transparency. The absence of a national voters list is not helpful and increases the risk of multiple voting. The lists of polling stations are incomplete for every region. The failure to produce clear and consistent and detailed figures on registered voters per constituency damage the transparency and credibility of the process. Each of these points damages the transparency of the results. 6. The EUM observed a clear lack of trust among the opposition in the election administration's neutrality. Also, the EU EOM observers regularly reported on the fear that opposition candidates expressed regarding the consequences of their political activities. We have been witnessing cases of arbitrary detention, cases of opposition militants severely punished for minor offences, like the destruction of posters. And the 7th point, the observers have noted significant shortcomings in voter education, inconsistent training of polling staff, inadequate voter education. The NGOs had no right to train voters, as NEBE, the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia, had the exclusive right to educate voters on these elections. And then election day was a calm and orderly day, where secrecy of the vote was respected and polling procedures were satisfactory in 87% of observed polling stations. But there was this lack of transparency. And you had these 27% of aggregated results that were different from initially announced results at the polling stations. The results of these elections show that EPRDF is in absolute control over the country on national and regional level. The opposition parties are extremely weak. EPRDF gained 544 seats out of 547, meaning 3 seats for opposition, 1 independent candidate, 1 for Midrek opposition party, and 1 for a small party, APDO. In state councils on a provincial level, EPRDF obtained 1,900 out of 1,904 seats. Let me now come to the recommendations. The main recommendations from this mission. On the electoral system and administration, enhance the representativity by a degree of proportionality in the electoral system, allow Ethiopians who live abroad to vote. It is necessary to review the constituency boundaries, as they are unclear in many cases. It will be necessary to limit the involvement of kebeles, is the lowest administrative level, local level. And it is necessary to create an independent structure for elections. They should not be organized by the kebeles themselves, as they are very often in the hands of the ruling party. It is necessary to improve the transparency and accountability with information on all aspects of the elections, with, of course, also an independent appointment of the leading people in the National Electoral Board, who should not have any other mandate than being a member of this National Electoral Board. It will be necessary to create a central national voters registry in order to avoid multiple voting. And it will be necessary to remove the limit on the number of candidates per constituency. And then on political parties and campaigning, Ethiopia needs to invest in the capacity building for its own political parties and improve the public financing of these political parties. It should consider a limit on campaign budgets so as to create a more level playing field. And it is perhaps a good idea to shorten the election campaign period. As for the voter education, we suggest to allow NGOs to educate voters, to be able and to have the right to educate voters, and to allow foreign funding of these NGOs. As for the media, who leaned heavily in favor of the ruling party, the media should provide equal free campaign airtime. Not only the state media, but all media should do this. And it should be possible to allow all journalists to cover elections and to abolish the system of registration of those journalists who wish to follow elections. A campaign silence as from 48 hours before election day could be imposed, and it is needed to create independent monitoring of compliance to balanced reporting by the state media. The participation of women should be promoted both as candidates for elections and in the election administration. As for the complaints mechanism, it is necessary to investigate on all complaints with a proactive role for the judiciary more than for the joint councils in which the parties deal with these complaints, thereby taking the role of the judiciary. They should not do that. It should be possible to create a national database for complaints and their outcome, open and transparent, accessible for all. As for the polling and counting, it should be possible and necessary to improve the training for polling station staff, to simplify the election administration forms, and to accept the voters' clear intention and not be so strict on the actual sign used on a ballot by a voter. Thank you very much. It's now time for questions. Yes, please. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Gabayo Nuguse, for Deutsche Welle Radio Horn of Africa service. Mr. Berman, you regrettably explained that you are not able to present the final report in Addis, but as it was known, there was an agreement between the Commission and the Ethiopian government, and the report was supposed to be released there in Addis. Why do you think, at this final stage, the government refused for you to go and release the report there? And the second question is, what is the reaction of the Commission? Because the Commission is the one who sponsored and makes the agreement. And we know that the Commission has engagement with the Ethiopian government. So what was the reaction of the Commission when its own observing mission is refused to go and present the final report? Thank you.
Well, I'm the chief observer to this mission. I'm not the spokesperson for the Ethiopian government. So I cannot say why they refused. What I can say is that we have tried over and over again to convince the Ethiopian government to let the presentation of the final report take place in Ethiopia. And it has taken weeks and weeks to try to convince the government. We have failed to do so. But ask the question to the Ethiopian government, I would be very interested in the response, in the answer. As for the reaction of the Commission, today there will be a statement by High Representative Catherine Ashton on the fact that we couldn't go to Ethiopia, and on the report itself. I refer you to this statement.
Robert Bloemen of the Dutch Press Agency. Mr. Berman, was there violence during the elections?
Sporadic, no. It was a peaceful election day, and also the electoral period before the elections was peaceful, apart from minor incidents. But the atmosphere of fear was there among opposition candidates and people who were militants for the opposition. That is clear. There have been cases of arbitrary detention. There have been cases where candidates have felt intimidated, and they filed complaints on this and felt that these complaints were inadequately handled with. I could add to that we have received a few reports on people who had injuries and went to hospital, but our observers could not obtain the hospital reports on these people, so we could not substantiate this. It's not in the report.
Yes, questions, please.
Yeah, thank you again. What impact will this situation, this refusal of Ethiopian government for the election observing here to go and present, and the content of the report itself have on the EU-Ethiopian government relation?
This is a very important question, but I am the EU chief observer to the elections. My role is really limited to the mandate of the election observation mission. Do the best you can to have an impartial, independent assessment of these elections. What happens after that is a political question to be dealt with by Council, European Commission, European Parliament. As the EU chief observer, I do not go into this question. As an MEP, after this, yes, I would be very happy to answer this question.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Ababa. I am reporting for Gimbo 7 Radio. My question is, given the experience of election 2005, there was huge pressure on European Parliament not to send any election observation mission to Ethiopia. What do you think you have obtained despite those pressure by going to observe this election? Thank you.
What we obtained by going and doing this election observation mission was this independent assessment of the elections. This is the only professional observation mission on a sufficiently national scale, on a sufficient national scale of Ethiopia, that is able to state with certainty what has happened during these elections. I think that is something Ethiopian citizens can work with. It is not my personal subjective opinion. This is an independent observation made by 170 people, professional, experienced people who have done, for many of them, several observation missions. So that is the value of this report.
France Émissaire, BBC Afrique. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous expliquer pourquoi ça...
Could you tell us why it's taken nearly 5 months to produce a report of this nature?
Répondre en anglais si vous voulez.
I'll answer in English if I may.
Why did it take 5 months? There were some logistical reasons, minor, but indeed the negotiation as to where to have the presentation of this final report took a long time. We would have been able to present the report much earlier.
Follow-up question, much earlier? When earlier?
We would have been ready by August.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you again. Prime Minister Malak Zenawi, right after the election, has announced that he won. And he also informed that this report you are making today is useless. What do you think will this give a lesson to the Prime Minister for any such election if it exists ever?
Well, whether it is a lesson to Mr. Zenawi, I'm not sure. I think that if he said that he has openly stated that he was not interested in the final report. I'm very sorry for that, because what this report does is assessing and analysing what happened during these elections. And we make very, very concrete recommendations as to how to improve the democratic process in Ethiopia. If the Prime Minister is genuinely concerned with this democratic process, I am sure he will read it. And he will take these recommendations at heart and work with the European Union to bring about the realization of the recommendations. And I think we need a thorough dialogue with this government and with the Prime Minister on the basis of this report. The intention is to improve citizens' right to elect their leaders freely and democratically. And that is something the Ethiopian law adheres to very clearly. So a dialogue with the Prime Minister is necessary. It makes no sense to dismiss this report. It doesn't make sense either to dismiss the Prime Minister as someone who doesn't want to read the report. I think he will read it, and I think he will thoroughly comment it.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Germa from Ethiopian Satellite Television. My question is, in comparison with the election 5 years ago in Ethiopia, do you think the democratic process in Ethiopia is improving or deteriorating?
I have not been the chief observer in 2005. In 2005, the situation was very different. The opposition was still stronger, as witnessed by the results at these elections, but also there has been a fair amount and a big amount of violence after the elections. That did not take place this time. But from the results and from our analysis of the results, you can see that there are many shortcomings in these elections. I leave it to you as journalists to make the assessment as so is this a deterioration or an improvement that there has been no violence? That in itself is an improvement. But what does it say? If, for instance, 27% of the outcomes in polling stations have been different from those in the end process of counting the votes. This is also a very serious fact to note. So I leave it to you to make this judgment. But I gave you the precise numbers of our observed cases where the electoral process deviated from what you might hope for.
report, I'm sure you might have repeated it again on this final one. You have asserted that the government used public resource to promote its own views and opinions. And Human Rights Watch recently unrevealed that this regime is using international aid money to promote its objectives as well as to intimidate its own citizens. There are a number of human rights violations that involved killing over the last 17-20 years. Now, in your assessment, what is the use of observing election under a totalitarian regime of such kind on earth by paying taxpayers' money from Europe?
Is this a question or a comment?
It's a question. I want to know your view.
I already answered the question on what is the use of doing this election observation mission in Ethiopia. We provide Ethiopian citizens and yourself, as an Ethiopian citizen I suppose, with a report that stands as an independent and thorough analysis of what has happened and how it could be improved in a very concrete and detailed way. No other report has this quality because we were there for over 2 months. So this is a tool you can use. It's a tool Ethiopian citizens can use. Any political party in Ethiopia can use it. The European Union can use it. The Ethiopian government can use it. That is the value of this report.
Thank you again. My question is regarding the role of European observing mission on building democracy in countries like Ethiopia. You know, the purpose of the observing mission is to support and you know, help the democracy building process in developing countries. But as often, it's observed that there is a difference between the observing mission and the executive, the commission. Sometimes the Commission goes, in some cases, in different way from the observing mission. Is there such trend now also, or you are just in one track together regarding the Ethiopian election process? Thank you.
It should be very clear that an election observation mission has a very peculiar status in the European Union. It is completely independent. And that means that it may very well happen that the European Commission takes its role a bit differently in its wordings than we take it as a European observation mission, election observation mission. And this is precisely what is needed. Everybody has his own role. You have the diplomats from the European Commission. You have the diplomats from European Union member states. You have European Parliament with politicians who have their very direct and clear judgments, political judgments. The European Election Observation Mission does not dwell into political judgments. It would only weaken the value of its final report. The goal is to give an independent and impartial assessment. So it may very well be, and I suppose it will be, that our judgment is different, will be in the wording and in the tone different from others. Very well.
Do you have any more questions? If not, then maybe we can take some printed questions because we asked journalists in Ethiopia beforehand to mail their questions to us. So maybe just revert to them because many questions are exactly similar as what you have been asking. So we're not going to repeat those questions. I was trying to come up with new questions here.
A new one.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read it instead of the journalist. Did the EU EOM observe incidents of donor-supported programs being used for political control or alleged in the recent Human Rights Watch report?
We did not.
Directly observed?
We did not. No, we did not observe these kind of cases. It may very well be that Human Rights Watch made an extremely valuable report, and I highly value Human Rights Watch in its role in the world. And I think that it has to be taken very seriously what Human Rights Watch writes. But our role is primarily to watch the electoral process in Ethiopia, and that is what we did. We did not do any investigations, by the way, nor did we have the means to do this kind of investigations on the use of development aid money. That is not within the remit, it's not within the mandate of an election observation mission to go into that kind of subjects. This is to be done by other people. So no, we did not witness this. Does not mean that it doesn't exist, but it means that we did not observe it because it was not our goal to observe such things.
Okay, and thank you. Maybe just one more question from a journalist in Ethiopia. The opposition is reported in Capital that the report will be of no use because it's too late. And can you please explain how the report will be put in use for the future? What do you expect of publicizing the report?
On the one hand, it's extremely regrettable, of course, regrettable that we could not present the report earlier, within, let's say, 2 months after the elections. Of course, we regret that deeply. On the other hand, the report is here. We will do everything we can to spread the word, to spread this report among Ethiopian citizens, and internet will be helpful. But not only internet, journalists, radio, television will all be very helpful, as we think that this is a report Ethiopian citizens are entitled to get. It is their report, not ours. It's their democracy, not ours. We are there to assist the Ethiopian citizens. So that is, I think, the answer on this question.
So any more questions from journalists present here? Yes, please go ahead.
I'm wondering, Mr. Bermans, what is your clear observation about the opposition parties inside the country? I heard when you said they were weak. Why do you think they are so weaker than what they was 5 years ago?
There are many answers to your question, but the main one is that there is a lack of level playing field, a very important lack of level playing field between the ruling party and opposition parties in general. The ruling party has been able to use state resources to strengthen its position, also during the campaign. That is a clear thing we have been witnessed directly. We have been witnessing it directly. The opposition parties are in a weak position, in a climate of fear among opposition people, in a climate in which the opposition can hardly campaign in a fair way. I mean to say, sorry, I expressed myself wrongly in English, can hardly compete in an adequate way, I mean to say. If the state media lean heavily in favor of the ruling party, if the written press gives more than 70% of its attention to the ruling party, it is very difficult for opposition parties to come through with their message. It is very difficult to be a candidate for an opposition party if you know that all state resources are in the hands of the ruling party. It is very difficult to exist even as an opposition party, you may say. The fact that Birtukan Mideksa has been released is a good thing and a welcome thing, but it does not bring the level playing field back in itself. It's a welcome fact, and we do welcome this as a mission because we, in our preliminary statement already, and in the press conference before the elections, we already stated that it would be a good thing if opposition leaders would not be imprisoned, because that is not the place where they belong. But the level playing field needs much more. It means capacity building of opposition parties. It means that the media are better controlled and monitored, in their handling of political parties. It means many, many, many aspects of daily life in Ethiopia.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have one opinion. As an Ethiopian, I have one opinion. Do you agree on this statement? We Ethiopians, the Ethiopian elite, the Ethiopians in the diaspora believe that the West, the European Union, the Americans strengthen the Ethiopian government, the repressive regime, a killer regime over the Ethiopian people. So the suffering of the Ethiopian people is strengthened by the support of the West. Do you agree on this?
This is typically the kind of judgment that I would not adhere to. If you would be someone who said something extremely positive about the Prime Minister, I would say the same thing. This is not my role to comment on this kind of judgments. I'm very sorry. I'm the chief observer of an election observation mission. I'm not there to give any support to any political judgments.
Okay, so we're going to take a question from the chat room that seems to be operating. A journalist is asking from Addis, why the observation mission failed to comment on the lack of playing field before election day?
You wouldn't say anything before election day.
It's our methodology.
The methodology of an election observation mission is such that we do not express ourselves publicly before the elections have taken place. So the journalist in Addis can ask me why we did not comment. Well, it's just because it's not our methodology, because we, as an election observation mission, do not want to influence the elections. We want to observe them. So that's why.
So if there are no more questions, we would like to close the press conference. I would like to call your attention to the press kit. You'll find our press release there with Mr. Berman's statement and a short fact sheet on the mission's findings. But we encourage you to please go through the final report, which is now available also online on the mission website in English and in Amharic. Thank you very much for coming and your interest in the final report. Thank you.
Good.